Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Wow, here we are. Thank you so much for joining us in our fifth industry webinar in our series focused on practical optimism in the international education sector here in Australia during the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, we focus on the future and we discuss what needs to change and some thoughts about what we can do to prepare. And we're also going to take stock of what's happening right now as well. My name is James Martin. I am from Insider Guides. We create guides and online content to prepare, welcome and support international students. We also help organizations promote their brands to international students at different stages of their journey. At the end of this webinar, you will be invited to complete a short survey, and we welcome your ideas on future speakers and topics and things like that. This is a Q&A webinar, although we'll address the questions and the answers at the end, unless they relate to the poll, which I'll talk about in a second. And that second is right now. There is a poll that we have as well, which Rob and I put together, and we just love to get your thoughts on some of the questions. So that will pop up as well. If not, it should appear as an option at the bottom of your screen. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rob Lawrence. Rob is an experienced strategist in the areas of marketing, strategy, research, branding, and media. Rob finds solutions to all sorts of complex issues and across all service categories, including corporates, governments, SMEs, peak bodies, universities, schools, tourism, and the professions. Seeking to support organizations with marketing clarity, he brings an unrivaled understanding of target segments and their drivers, as well as creative and effective strategies to reach them. He's certainly very experienced, and he is the godfather of international education. Yeah, no, that is true. Thank you very much for joining us here today, Rob.
Pleasure. I should have brought a violin case.
All right, well, let's dive in. Whilst no one can predict how the international education sector might recover, Rob knows the sector well through many years of institution and student insight. In this webinar, we will take a deep dive and look at how the sector might move through the innovation and adaptation to a new domestic and international environment. We'll consider online learning. We'll consider its impact on the export of education in Australia, and which makes such a significant contribution to our economy and our communities. While we won't be able to cover every topic in depth, hopefully today's webinar provides ideas for discussion at all levels in the sector. So, well, let's dive in, Rob. Let's go for it. No worries. Cool. But thank you all again for everyone. These webinars have been super popular, and we're very grateful for all the support that you've all shown to continue coming back as well every week. So, right, well, here we are. At the 1999 Association of International Education Conference, Rob, you presented a groundbreaking research study into the Asian University Student of 2000. Interestingly, 20 years on, you've replicated the same study to determine just how much has changed and what factors now influence students from the world's largest source markets in 2020. Rob, what did this study tell you about how the international education sector has evolved over the past 20 years?
Look, firstly, can I just start by saying I'm delighted to have been asked to do this and to join with so many people I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. So thank you for that, James. The Asian Student of 2020. Now, everyone's had bad luck, but I released it on January the 15th of this year. So that is really bad luck. But it's the relevance to it is still there because the knowledge is still there and it tells you about what's changed. And there have been a few changes which really highlight how far we've progressed as a country, how far we've really created our strong proposition. And one of the big changes from the last one was only about a third of students came to Australia as a destination of choice. It was mainly a default position. But now Australia has clearly become a destination of choice. Yes, we've got lifestyle, we've got climate, clean, very clean, green. We've got a lot of other assets which people like around the world. But this time, the whole thinking had changed. There was a huge focus on quality, about how good we are and what we deliver. And not just quality of the programs, but also the quality of facilities, services, the whole experience. We didn't have rankings in 2000s. They didn't start, I don't think, until about 2003-4. But rankings obviously plays an important part in actually people forging their perceptions. We've got outcomes. We have huge advocacy, not just through the agent channels, but through social media, the hundreds of thousands of images that are uploaded each day. And it's all been underpinned by a very strong regulatory environment. So a lot of good things are already working for us there. Then we've got far greater student diversity now. So we've got basically not diversity, not just by nationalities, but also the different types of people that are motivated to come here. You can look at it as individual values and the diversity of opportunities we're offering them. And of course, often based around the most important return on investment for an international student, which is employment. The next big change was changing buyer behaviours. This is something, when we come out of this, we need to really measure how buyer behaviour has changed. People are making more sophisticated course choices. And those course choices aren't around those traditional markets which buoyed the industry early on, the numbers doing business. There's some greater diversity of course choices based around things which we saw around migration, for example, and access to regional post-study work rights, etc. It's also about next generation skills and access to next generation industries. In about 5 years ago, we started talking more and more about employability. So we've got the employability assets, and then we've got the ability which people are looking for to transition between different locations, between different industries and roles. New media has changed the buying window, and I was thinking about this. In 2000, I remember a university once telling me, oh, we don't encourage people to, or we don't send the information out to people for about 6 weeks. We don't want to look too keen. Well, that's changed everything. It's now a short-term window. Selection is really, it's all about immediacy now. And people are used and conditioned to personalised engagement. And of course, what is also happening, you've got all these directories and data sets, people are being exposed to more options. And when you get more options, you get the opportunity to make comparisons. Probably one of the biggest differences, really significant difference, and it was happening, but it didn't start happening really until about 2012-13. Back in 2000, there was the predisposition to country. I want to study in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, America, wherever. That conversation has changed so dramatically. It is now, I want to study in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, wherever. So it's about predisposition to city or place. And what drives that? Number one, presence of family and friends. So many students used to come here isolated, alone, no one to meet and greet them. They had to find accommodation. They checked into homestays, those types of things. Now they've often got networks, and these networks provide them with that sense of identity. They've been impressed by impressions. They see it through social media, their networks, the photographs, the uploads. A lot have had prior exposure to the country prior to getting here. One of the big differences as well is that whereas people would often look at universities and just hope, there's the combined strengths of multiple brands in the one place, which has created that sense of, you know, these are the brands associated with Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, etc. And these established networks as well meant that people don't necessarily end up lonely from day one. There are now many, many more information sources. You know, there were hardly any embedded representative staff in a country before, but now there's lots of embedded staff, and there are lots of points of validation. We've got a second, third generation. We have about 33% of, for example, students at the and the group of 8 universities from Singapore and Malaysia have a sibling also that they're all going there. It's that sense of point of validation that is reinforcing. A couple more points. The expectations have changed. We've seen the landscapes, those points of focus around different cities. We see the big markets. We see Federation Square in Melbourne. We see Glenelg in Adelaide. We see these points of reference. And one of the things that was picked up was that very early on, about within a week, most international students have sent a picture at a point of reference within their city or location. We're also seeing, we hardly had pathways back then. They were there, but not to the extent they are now. The expectation is we can pathway into an institution. We've got a lot of differentiated providers. We've seen the boom in on-campus accommodation. And the one which really stood out to me on this study was the student hubs, that we've actually given a sense of community and place to students around these hubs. And your city, James, is a really good example. You know, you've got that wonderful student hub that's been built at Flinders. It's a world-class hub. Adelaide, the ditto, the same. And then you've got the development of West Terrace down, or North Terrace down at the West End in Adelaide. So all three of those universities in Adelaide, as an example, have created this place. And compared with 2000, I'd say that international students are generally more aware, they're more resilient, they're more knowledgeable, they're more informed, and they're more independent. So that's how I've seen the changes since the 2000 work.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I guess with the rise of online media, as you said, that the ability to do research and personalize your experience is unbelievable, completely different to what it was then. And so these students are arriving, bringing their own news sources with them on their own smartphones, and they don't necessarily have to engage with the local community anywhere near as much, and they sort of carry it through, which presents a whole bunch of other problems, but it's just fascinating how that happens. One of the things that you did talk about in that study was the ease of obtaining work after graduating.
Yeah.
Given the significant impact on the global economy that we are only just starting to see now, do you feel that this motivator might change with a bit of time?
Oh, right. There's several ways you can look at that. You've got access into part-time work. I guess secondly, you've got post-study work rights. And the third one is access into graduate employment. And I'm talking here, back home, elsewhere, anywhere really. The issue I have there is that the prospect of part-time work will impact the price-sensitive markets. There's a lot of people who do need that part-time work to be able to survive. But it's not just survival. There's a hidden problem here, which is the ability to repatriate loans. A lot of them have taken out loans, their families have taken out loans, they're repaying family, etc. And I think that's going to be a big problem. And the other problem, I think that might be associated with that, it won't affect large numbers, but it will affect people, is the ability to secure loans in future, as you know, from the banking sources. And of course, they've got to balance the budget, so the living and accommodation costs, not just on top of the study costs. The second factor is that employment is actually the biggest return on investment for an international student. I'm not just talking about the qualification itself, but also all of those skills and competencies, the capabilities. They want recognition when they go home for the institution, for the field of study, about what they can achieve. And it's going to get crowded out there globally, not just in Australia, but globally. And so people are going to have to create their own brand, and that brand is all about individual differentiation. There'll also be changing home circumstances. We're going to see a lot of industries, collapse or demise. Sadly, we're seeing it in Australia with tourism in Queensland, and those types of industries will take a long time to recover. But I'm not gloomy about that, because there are other aspects which I'll try and touch upon later, but I'll touch on it now. The real issue is how work and employment opportunities will change, and the preparation that's needed for that change. There will be, and there already was starting decline, there will be fewer traditional graduate entry programs. And that simply is a fact of life. A lot of organisations are saying, no, I want people that can hit the ground running. That we're going to see a decline and demise of some industries, big but, I think we're going to see a rapid escalation in new industries, really new industries. And with that, we're also going to see growth in areas such as the gig economy, where people need to have such skills as marketing, customer services, business presentations, negotiation. So there's a whole raft of employability content, short-term content, which people will be accruing. We'll see the evolution of startup space. We're already seeing it. Outcomes Life is a classic example of someone that's helped in that startup space. We're going to see SMEs becoming really more and more important. And so we'll see the whole environment change. We're going to see a greater focus on enterprise. And alongside enterprise, I'd add the word creativity, because you tell me of any business or organisation that doesn't want creativity or doesn't want, their enterprise skills. We'll see different workplace patterns. Everyone in this webinar is experiencing different workplace patterns. and a lot of that will continue. And then there's also going to be this need, which is why I think the short-term modular micro-credential market is going to fly off the roof, because they're going to need constant employability attributes like design thinking, cross-cultural communications, 3D immersion, special effects, digital media, you name it. So new sectors will emerge, new industries will evolve. Dare I say it, what's happening could ultimately become the biggest catalyst for change since the Industrial Revolution. If we could fast track a few years, we might see we've skipped a generation, and just imagine that. That is so exciting. We can see so many new industries around stuff that's early now, the renewables, the recyclables, the materials, the composites, the carbon fiber wheels, all those types of things I've seen just in the last few months. We're going to see all those industries emerge. And of course, we mustn't forget the online markets.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. I mean, I guess when I started that question, it was all about sort of finding a job. But one of the things that international students are telling us that they're doing is trying to create their own job. And it's something that I hope universities can keep up with this, and the vet sector as well, that they're, rather than preparing students to obtain work, there's a trend for students to want to create work and build their own careers.
James, can I just add a point on that one? There's about 70% of international higher education students come from families with their own industry or own background or own employment. So we say we're good at the gig economy. They've been doing it for generation after generation.
Yeah.
That's in the DNA.
It's fascinating. I mean, we could have a whole webinar on the future of just that one topic. It's so many things to unpack. I'd like to sort of progress to where we are right now. The federal government's financial support for students to date has been unashamedly pretty focused on domestic students. We now know the Australian government's response to supporting international students is very different to how Canada, New Zealand, the UK, where they've extended wage subsidies and things like that. We've talked a lot about the support for international students and the ins and outs of that in other webinars. So I'd like to maybe take that hat off and put on the marketing hat here. If we approach this with a bit of a long term, do you think this will have a negative impact on Australia's reputation as a leading international student destination?
Okay. What you're suggesting is that people might assume that they'll opt for a different destination because of what other competitors offer. And I just don't see that's the case. It's not so. If anything, if I was a parent sending my kids to go to school in another country or university, you'd have to be starting to say, well, where's safer to live and study and to be? So the first part of your question about the shift elsewhere, firstly, that's not that easy. You've got to source the options, you've got to apply, you've got to go through admissions, applications, communications. It takes time. There's a process to follow. And by the time that process is completed, probably the borders will be open anyway. And there's a perceptual thing about changing choices. How do I put this? When we think about a country, we're in a zone. So I'm going to Australia. So I've zoned Australia. I look at social media every day. I watch Home and Away if it's on my TV at home. Rubbish like that. It's probably a bad example. Probably ageism there creeping in. But I think the thing of what I'm trying to say is that people look for images, they look for the networks, they look for the YouTube clips and so on. So to change choice from somewhere where you are preconditioned, you're predisposed, you're kind of in the zone to go somewhere is not easy. And to change as well means you might have to negate or get rid of the factors around predisposition, going to a place where you've got family and friends, going to a place where your family went. And other countries, let's look at the scale of response and the behaviours and what's impacting. If I was sending my kids to the UK or USA, I'd really be concerned about it now, seeing the way people have, misbehaved. And, we've been very good. So you asked, the second bit of your question was really about what will it impact? And obviously that led into your comment about, is it going to have a negative, I think you said marketing there.
Yeah. Will this approach impact on Australia's reputation?
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at that twofold. If we're all frustrated and, an international student is going to be sending out messages back home to family and stuff about their frustrations, but they're short-term frustrations, and yeah, it might affect the kind of way they advocate country, but they're still doing the same things in the UK, the US, other countries as well. So it's not just, New Zealand. It's not just about what's happening here. It's about same things are happening elsewhere. And, we've got to look at it from the student perspective that a lot of them have got unrealized expectations. They've lost jobs. They're grappling with the online. There's an area which I think is very concerning. There's a sense of isolation, separation, distance. They might have networks here, but, it might be a long time till they see family back in their home country. There's the well-being issue. And there's one other thing which hasn't come into the debate, but it's something that does bother me. A typical international student spends at a university, I should say, spends about 2.5 times more time on campus than their domestic counterpart. So the institution becomes their point of reference, their sense of place and space. It's almost like a sense of security. They're buying access into that place. So if they can't have that point of reference, then they are isolated, and that affects the mental condition as well. And so these things would all be said, and this is first and foremost, this is a word of mouth industry. We might have agents to help facilitate or help the application process. We might have representatives, but ultimately it's a word of mouth industry. So in terms, you mentioned reputation. Well, you've got to look at reputation several ways and about the messages. And I think we need to really assert ourselves as world best practice. We as a country and institutions, the industries responded remarkably. It is absolutely phenomenal. No one could have written a textbook on it. And I think we shouldn't downplay the fact that we should talk up our response. We should really talk it up. We can and we will continue to deliver on quality. We'll provide personalised support by institutions. That's been extraordinary. We've coordinated really superb coordinated cross-sectoral response. When this is all over, lifestyle factors will return. And there's one more thing which I should add on to that. We've also used this as an opportunity to offer a more diverse proposition. We've been investing in new courses, new services, new deliverables. There are going to be new industries. We're going to see new opportunities. There's going to be stimulus to make things grow again. We'll be seeing, I think, the promotion and reputation of Australia will grow, if anything, and new platforms. So, yeah, we need to look after the well-being, and there have been some mixed messages out there. But do I think we'll keep attracting? You asked. Yes, absolutely, unequivocally yes. We must retain the sense of Australia as a friendly, welcoming, and student-centred destination. Yes, we've got to keep reinforcing those attributes of place. And let's look at the positives of international students, the extended working arrangements, for example, for health, disability and aged care. The states have stepped up to the plate. You made reference to the Victor government's contribution today. The federal and state governments are collaborating. There's been regular, widespread sector engagement and reporting. You've got initiatives such as Study with Australia. So you asked, would it have a negative? I actually think quite the opposite. I think it would be a reversal. The word I've used before, and the words I've used a few times recently, is the sum of the whole. And if you look at the sum of the whole of how we responded and now what we offer, it's going to have a positive impact.
Yeah, we've got a comment here from John Crutchley saying, I believe this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Australia's international education sector. All the major countries are starting from zero, and we can be the lead safe country. I tend to agree. I mean, we've got, the lowest case numbers in the world, some of the lowest case numbers in the world. And if we're not going out next year saying, hey, or this year saying we were the country that got this under control, that's a great selling point, as well as everything you were saying about the way that the universities and colleges and TAFEs are responding. Just the fact that we were safe is a great selling point. I will move on a little bit here. I mean, international student fees have been a major funding, and I haven't been able to ask this question too much because we've been right in the middle of this pandemic, and I would love to sort of ask this question now to you. International student fees have been a major funding source for university research and have really become the backbone of Australian research training. A decline here will have further consequences for the international ranking of Australian universities. Your study found that rankings were the third strongest motivator for students to study in Australia, But without that cash to keep the universities humming along and the research going, do you think rankings will become more or less important for the student recruitment teams across Australia?
That's okay. Let's look at it two ways. Some of the richest universities in the world won't be affected by this. The Harvard, so they're going to carry on still dominating at the top of rankings. But we're not comparing those. Rankings are an interesting one. They're a tangible comparative measure. They give people a sense of where they stand. They can even look at it as a measure of quality, status, prestige, all those things. And they do continue to influence attitudes and perceptions from many markets. We know particularly from Asia. But at the same time, there are lots of rankings, and not many students around the world understand their intricacies. And rankings also have a downside as well. For example, high rankings often equate with high costs. Another thing I'd say in all this is, like I said earlier, rankings will impact everyone because research has been affected everywhere. So we might see just a lowering of the layer and the things might not change. So in future promotion, we've got to use metrics to reaffirm our status and our position. There are things like course rankings, there's class sizes, there's graduate outcomes, there's number of startups. All these things can be added to contribute. But I think there's something else that's going to come back up a little bit, and I'd like to see it really forced down the market, or by the market, down to the deepest levels. We have shown recognition. Now, a few years ago, recognition used to almost be a word that was used in more than rankings. I would get that message around recognition out there hard and strong, that if you've come here, you will have recognition, you will be recognized, you'll be treated as an individual, you'll be treated with respect when you go and look for a job somewhere, anywhere in the world, because you studied here, because we're a quality destination. So yes, rankings may topple, may go up and down. I think it'll all level off in a year anyway, in terms of the research profiling, but I think this is an opportunity to build recognition into the equation.
What about degrees? Do you think the degrees will still hold the same value in the future?
Are you asking whether or not people want degrees, or?
Yeah, I guess with this changing environment where people are sort of creating their own jobs, we're doing all these the changing landscape of education. I guess the question has to be raised: will they still be of value next year?
Yeah, I thought you were going to say value. Look, degrees are needed for many professions and vocations. They're necessary. There are societies and cultures who value degrees. It's a measure of attainment. It's a measure of success. And degrees are often associated with the opportunity to study on a campus, in a university community. And many audiences see the degree as a ticket. That's their value is the ticket. But it's already evident that there are many organisations, from multinationals to SMEs, who are looking more and more for specific skills and capabilities. And these are specialisations really that could be acquired through lots of means, from short intensive, it could flag another layer of content provision around such areas as creativity, I mentioned earlier, enterprise, digital media, 3D, special effects, communications. So it really says that, okay, if you're going to change for degrees, all audiences need relevance, they all need subject matter expertise, and they all need differentiation, and differentiation often through specialisation. So that introduces the concept of maybe institutions, as a result of this, should become membership platforms, so that the degree is one part of the proposition, but so is the ongoing feeding of information. People want bite-sized content. They're interested in accrual. They want to see, if you had a membership model, they want to see progression indicators. They want to see ways to which they can respond to next generation demand. So we will still have a degree market, and we might find there's a proportion in that, a subset that want other aspects rather than a degree. And we might see some changes also. We might see the decline in some postgraduate programs, MBAs, for example, but we might see the elevation of some very specific different types of degree awards, which can also be out there. And the model might change. So we will see, though, unheralded growth, in my view, in anything that caters for relevance and subject matter expertise.
That's what you said about membership models for universities. That's it's such an interesting point, and I guess something that is based on that model is the idea that the offering gets better the more people are a part of it, and so that whole sense of community comes around it as more students join. I think that could be its own webinar as well. You could go into how universities, institutions can adapt into the post-COVID life. But not all institutions have the same resources as universities, and so how might some of the smaller providers, some of the private education providers, for example, pivot quickly into new degrees or new ways of learning?
Many are already offering niche areas, and the most successful of the private providers do have a niche offering. They've also got their own following. If people want to look it up sometime, look at Hyper Island. They've been around a long time, 20 odd years, I think. And anything that's brand new in digital, they're onto it. And they say we're creative and innovative first and education second. They do pop-up education around the place. Suddenly notice, we're Stockholm next week or Singapore next week. And they've got a global footprint, and they offer everything from short intensives, which they do by the tens of thousands, to full degrees. I think they've got over 5,000 online degree space. We're also going to see private providers who might come under the auspices of existing providers, and that we might see them through flanking brands. And we're also seeing private providers who are different now. For example, multinationals delivering industry targeted content. I can think immediately of those offered by HSBC and Cathay. We're going to see more and more employer partnerships to credit staff. The big insurance companies like Aon do all that. We'll see member service organisations. You might see RACV starting to become a private provider in its own right. But the secrets are the private providers, in my view, secrets. No, the thoughts, my thoughts rather secrets. The ones who have most succeeded, I believe, will be very niche. They'll provide relevant, up-to-date, latest content. They'll be very agile and flexible. They'll get stuff up and running quickly. They'll have diverse delivery platforms. If they embrace that membership thinking, they'll have a loyalty following. Hyper Island's almost a cult in one sense. They'll be market-led rather than supply-led, and we often fall into the supply-led trap. And they'll offer value.
Yeah, that's I guess the ones that might struggle are the ones that offer, things like hairdressing and barista training, those sorts of types of providers. But there are a fair few that can certainly move to online, just embracing off-the-shelf technology right now. And we're seeing, I'm amazed at how many institutions are pivoting so quickly and so effectively, actually, to online delivery. All these things that were considered in too hard basket are now very much front and center, but we'll get to that. I'd like to talk about the school sector a little bit. International secondary students contribute a great deal to the school sector. Homestay programs, wider community. Longer term, many stay on and become tertiary students and act as ambassadors for Australia's education. What could the long-term impact be on this market as a result of what's happening right now? And what about the appeal of high school exchange programs, that sort of thing?
Okay, two parts to that. It's a very diverse segment, and I often argue that I don't think the school segment is fully understood in terms of its potential and how important it is. And within schools, you've got some very distinct audience categories. You've got a lot of schools, and particularly the private boarding schools, where there's a family loyalty patterns that go back generations. Existing family networks have a major play where if there's family in a city, they might choose that city. There's a large component who might have accompanying parents. There's those seeking early advantage, through getting into English language quickly. They are a very important segment for another reason, though. This segment are very strongly predisposed to Australia. That makes it a high yield market. The average duration in country is significantly higher if they've gone to school, often exceeds 6 years. And it's a segment that also may view Australia as safer. My view, those students here will still remain. It's a very high values purchase segment. In many areas, they're very affluent families. And, I think that will recover very quickly, that part of it. But your second part was exchange, and that's a different story, inbound and outbound. And it's a more volatile, more vulnerable market. It impacts all kinds of companies who offer exchange, homestay hosts. And if I was a parent, I would probably be looking for 2 or 3 years delay now, inbound or outbound, because there's still the fear of safety. There's a fear of having your children stranded. Does the risk outweigh the value of the experience? I'm talking here only the short-term programs of exchange. And of course, not necessarily the more affluent, which might go to a boarding school. So there may be additional costs which might impact these families.
2 or 3 years.
It could be. That's a hard one to call, but I don't think the school sector full stop, but I do think the exchange sector is going to have a hard time.
Wow. Well, I mean, if we go back to the university sector now, we're looking at, $5 billion in predicted losses. There's been some commentary in the recent media about an over-reliance on international students and a sector-wide average of 24% of total revenue generated from international students. The mainstream media are having a field day with this. And, do you think, yeah, you can, do you see, we might see a shift in the reliance on international students from universities?
Look, they're going to have to restore their revenue, aren't they? But they're also, and I think they're already working towards it, many of them, they're going to have to change their platforms. They're going to have to rework a lot of the planning and activities. They're going to need more diversity. And I'm not just talking about markets. I'm talking about products, means of delivery, and I think that extends to domestic markets. I would be almost certain there'll be a dramatic shift to offshore delivery as well, which will address some of the price barriers that will emerge. And it's a vehicle to diversify mix and revenue, but also a way of getting a footprint into a country. We'll see new and alternative partnership models. There's every reason why a university can't partner with industry rather than with an institution. I think also, and this is a little bit heresy, and I'll probably get shot down and a few emails, I think we became too dependent, too reliant on scholarships. At times I felt they were being too liberally used. They may be difficult to peg back because what happened with all those scholarships going out there is they changed audience expectations. And I've got to say, we need to stop undercutting. We need to go back to basics. We need to compete on quality and all those measures. So some institutions have also become independent universities on partnerships. They may pursue different options, different models. They might have multiple streams of partnerships rather than maybe a dedicated one. That's a possibility. But also you've got to look at the whole supply chain. It's not just universities who became reliant. It's tourism, accommodation providers, developers, those high-end retailers. I joked about the Versace effect once at a presentation, saying graduation day in Collins Street, Melbourne, they're queuing up outside Armani, Versace, everywhere else. They're all going to be hit, luxury car. People are crying poor, the downtown retailers, the shopping malls. And you've got to sort of bear in mind that, I've said this for years, pro rata, there are more international higher ed students in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane than in any city in the world of over 50,000 people per capita. So we are talking a high dependence. So any future planning needs to be around risk mitigation, but I believe the prospect pool will remain, but I think the composition of the prospect pool will change.
Well, let's talk about that risk mitigation strategy. One of those could be offshore campuses and having a local presence in order to reduce the risk of these disruptions happening again. Do you see that happening more and more?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. And the question is where and when. And it's difficult because there's a lot of, I've worked on this for a long time in offshore campuses and partnerships, etc., on projects on due diligence. And you've got different regulatory environments. You've got to find your right partner. There's lots of people I'll tell you, I suspect institutions are being swamped by potential partners at the moment, but you've got to select those partners. You've got to work out where the next fields of opportunity are. And also I think there's some investment issues because it's no longer the high turnover, low cost delivery model, but people are looking to engineering sciences, biotech, biomeds now. That means laboratories, equipment. So, and we can't afford what happened in early 2000s. If with anything, quality's got to be key. So offshore delivery has huge amounts of benefit, increases the prospect pool, amplifies the brand. It enables diversification. It allows you to expand your distribution reach. Onshore reliance is reduced. I suppose there's always the question of appetite and capacity, because they take time to set up. There's lots of steps: risk mitigation, negotiating, staffing, the investment. And the big mistake we made in the 2000s was the lack of on-campus management. A big challenge was systems integration. So there is a potential for a collaborative approach, but the chances are the UK, Canada, and other countries will do the same. Some of our early cost models were dire, where we earned pitiful amounts from them. That can't happen again. Some were poorly constructed, managed, and to do properly, then maybe we may effectively become more expensive than other countries. But if we get the model right, it will supplement what we offer. It can ultimately become a transition pipeline which can grow.
That's a fascinating answer. It's just, I got so many questions. I need to sort of remember what I'm. But if you look at the new or world order of international education, Australian universities will be up against it. Let's be honest. And when this happens, when the borders reopen and we're going back to market, do you think that there'll be a change in the way that we view traditional source countries such as China, India, Nepal, Vietnam? Do you think that that the focus of recruitment programs will have to shift?
Look, we'll need greater region diversity, but some of the core premises will remain. You've always got the group who are past family purchase patterns, where it becomes a rite of passage. We've got those attracted here because of proximity and access, Southeast Asia being one. That predisposition I kept going on about, networks, past exposure, residency. You've got the standings, the rankings. There are some environmental risks. We've got to acknowledge those, the part-time employment situation. There could be potential regulatory change. I hope not. I think it'd be a terrible mistake to make, terrible. Any changes to work rights or regional credits. Affordability could become an environmental risk, but some markets will be sustainable. They might be reduced for a bit, Southeast Asia, parts of China. Some markets will, we have to be honest, sharply decline with the study abroad. English language has got this set of challenges. And some of those really new markets to Australia, like Bhutan, and the highly price sensitive segments will be impacted, like Nepal, Philippines, and those difficulties I mentioned of securing loans. The solutions, intensive, large-scale investment in shoring up our position, reasserting what we afford. That's definitely up there. We've got to re-engage with our channels. We've got to create more diverse product portfolios. Got to put a greater focus on investment in the experience, not just use it as a revenue. We've learned that lesson, I hope. Maintain the commitments which we've shown to student support. We've got to invest in new markets and segments. And I've always argued that a certain percentage of fee, 1%, 1.5% of international students, should go into a levy for new market generation. Wow. Few institutions have done it, but most don't follow that one. We've got to work. We've also going to have to accept we might have a reduced duration, higher turnover situation. So people will stay for less, but so we'll need more. It's like the old retail. You might have less margin, so you need more customers. We need to keep pushing for all levels of government support, and we've got to keep building advocacy. And we've got to keep some of the formulas right. This cross-sector collaboration has been a real win.
Yeah, it's I tend to think there's a lot of institutions that are just really focusing on 2021 as a bit of a bounce back. I've been talking to a lot of universities in the last couple of weeks and colleges who are getting in touch with us to ask about what's happening in 2021. What markets can we help them reach out to in all over Asia and in the Middle East? It's quite nice to know that the industry, while everyone seems to be zigging, we're zagging, and we're going to try and reinforce our position in key markets. So, it's nice to hear that. If we talk about the online delivery a little bit, because that is one of the biggest challenges as well, and there's going to be some more cross-border collaboration with universities there. How do you, in terms of digital platforms and programs, how do you see that evolving?
Well, it will evolve, and we've got an opportunity to position ourselves as world best practice again. And I just don't think it's just about those digital platforms; they're also about the universities. And don't just think about universities, I should say. I think over the next few years, we're going to see a whole new layer of education providers. Think about ANZ, think about HSBC, They may become content producers and service providers as they need to diversify their own models. You could have hundreds of branches of ANZ HSBC delivering content. Can education keep pace with innovation? I did a video on it. Anyone's welcome to it. I can send it to you to download, but it's basically, can education keep pace with innovation? The only way for people to remain relevant is to access new content. So all providers will need to be fast and adept, and industry will look for more tangible proof points. Individual differentiation will be around specialization. So people are going to need ongoing acquisition of education.
And I just touch on that. I realized I missed a point a few minutes ago about semester 2. What's your thoughts on that, on semester 2, regarding bringing students to Australia?
That's a bit of an elephant in the room at the moment. It's there's a lot of confusion about when the bans will be lifted. Will we be doing online? There's the impact on expectations. I also am getting a lot of questions. Should we delay semester 2? Should we do in 3 semesters next year? There's a lot of questions around those types of fields. Your question is basically, when do I think it'll happen? Or
yeah, I guess every university and college around Australia is trying to work out what they should be offering in semester 2. And there's some questions coming through right now about that too. I don't think anyone has the right answer, and I know for sure that there's several universities around Australia that are still trying to work it out.
It's a very hard question. It's because it's a lot of unknowns. Let's say if all the state border restrictions are lifted in 2 or 3 weeks' time, that will have a different approach. I was talking to a TAFE Institute this morning, which has now got students going on campus on small numbers. There are other institutions I know looking at staged approaches. We're saying encourage schools back. So it's very, very hard to predict at the moment. What I don't think we should do, rather than what we should do, is I don't think we should reduce in any way the commitment we've shown to delivering content through other platforms. I don't think we should change in any shape or form the level of support and personalised engagement that's been provided. And as time goes on, we'll get better. I don't know what the limitations are. You're not going to have 800 students in a lecture theatre. So we might have to switch to flipped learning and other techniques, to reduce all that. And we're going to be practicing social distancing. But I would like to see semester 2 showing a lot more positive. I think it'd be a really good signal to send out there that people can access facilities and equipment and stuff now. That would be the dream. That would be the dream.
Yeah, I think it's a question. We'll have to have a few more webinars about the re-emergence in semester 2. But speaking on the theme of re-emergence, how do you think over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, the international recruitment practices will change, and specifically, I guess, the relationship with education agents?
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of ways to look at this. Efficiency, transparency, engagement, they're all going to have to be key. I've said it a few times, we've got to be world best practice. We've got to maintain the very highest levels of compliance to underpin the recruitment practices. I think we're going to become stricter. I think, hopefully, I'd like to see that compromised applications submitted to universities or colleges or whatever will not be accepted. There should be little leniency for poor performing agents. I'd like to see no more market flooding. I've seen horrendous numbers of people from different destinations applying to an institution where no one actually goes. It's already proven that engagement and communications are critical. That will continue. Student support will continue as exemplar, as advocacy generator. Channel management needs to be a priority. We need to, and I think, and as an outcome of all this, and I'm sorry to any agents tuning in, I think there'll be a reduced reliance on agents. I think the relationship with agents could eventually change, and so there'll be a greater emphasis on embedded staff and encouraging direct applications. There'll be much stricter protocols around poaching. I think we've got to address the issues of confusion, any confusion over scholarship. There should be a growth and retention tool. And regarding agents, is good and bad across every industry. And the professionalism has improved amongst many of them. And many providers have better managed their agent networks, and agents are people too. They've got their own livelihoods and pressures and stresses as well. And they've been physically isolated in one sense from our community. But I think the fallout will be the shape and composition of agents will change. I think you might see more facilitators, you might see more service brokers, you might see a shift from the sales model to a two-tier model, sales and facilitation. And you may even see industry groups, professional associations acting as recruiters.
Well, I guess the agents are somewhat, I guess they're the link between the marketing from a university to the student, and they do have an important marketing role here. But if you think about the marketing message to international students, what do you feel are the messages that will still resonate, or what are the new messages that may appeal to them in the future?
Okay, we've got to maintain the ones that have served us so well today. The Australian proposition remains. In fact, the Australian proposition has become stronger in many ways because of the commitment, the personalisation, the commitment to supporting and sharing, the in this together hashtag. We've got to collaborate across all education layers for consistency of message, build upon the secondary layers, dynamic country, multicultural, sense of place, quality, commitment to ROI, all those things. We need a whole of sector approach, I think, to managing expectations. And that means we've got to work around affordability. Part-time work is key for many. Delivery online is not people signed up for. Sense of welcome from the governments and sector has been wonderful. So we've got to keep pushing these messages.
Yeah, that's an interesting one about in our online poll, and thanks for taking part in our poll. We've had 140 people use it. One of the first question was, how satisfied are you with the collaboration between states and federal government agencies? 58% said they were satisfied, which is great. And I think that speaks to your point, Rob, that and I am too. I deal with a lot of the study bodies and the Study Australia guys, and the way in which they've come together is unbelievable, and it needed to as well, I think.
Extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah, and thanks again for taking part in our poll. There's some interesting questions here. One of the ones which country do you believe will recover the fastest? It's almost neck and neck, Australia and New Zealand. US has had 0 votes. New Zealand 48, Australia 52. Wow, okay. So New Zealand was considered going to rebound slower than Australia. Interesting. So I'll send the results of these polls out there, but you guys are the right people to ask these questions too. So Rob and I were very excited to ask you these questions and get your answer. Rob, we'll ask one last question and then we'll go to some Q&As. Could the increased focus on online learning encourage students to then complete a short-term or postgraduate study program in Australia? Do you think there could be future opportunities in collaborative destination marketing approaches, things like that?
Yeah, I think what we've got to look at is different product models, different service models. We've got to be more ingenious about the way we do this. Of course, there's a large proportion of people who come here, students who come here, who want a longer term experience because it can lead somewhere for them, post-study work rights, etc. But I think as well, there's going to be a lot of demand for high specialization in fast-growing industries. We've got to look at new ways of delivering those, what new products and services there can be. We can use postgrad and short-term courses to augment people's skills and competencies. I get back to my earlier point about buyer behaviours will change. People will need to remain relevant and updated. Specialisation will be that key. But I've also spoken about this a lot over the last few years. All students, and that's all international and domestic students, will need to and will want to build their own portfolio of assets based around new skills, competencies, experience, networks, capabilities, etc. So the next generation of students, of course, will be working in a different society and economy. You talked about collaboration. We need to leverage how and promote how well Australia has responded. The things, even down at a political level, this, national cabinet with all the premiers. I was speaking to Rebecca Hall yesterday, and she said, "Rob, it's not just about recovery; it's about renewal." And that triggered me to think it's a catalyst for change. We can leapfrog 10 years by skipping a generation, and we've seen some great collaboration efforts. The one hashtag, the keep building key messages, the weekly meetings with state and territory clusters, the study with Australia, study Australia partnership. And I think collaboration is why we will come out of all this much stronger and much better.
Yeah. It's I think it's what's really crucial that the states are really stepping up, and that's something I didn't expect it. When this first happened, I thought, there's going to be a federal response, and then the institutions will do something. But what has been absolutely amazing is seeing all the state bodies jumping in, and then the federal government working in tandem with them, and then the institutions doing their own hardship funds. And it's such an evolution. We're seeing it in real time. And we're all at home watching it happen. So we've got some questions here. I've got a couple of interesting ones here. So with the likelihood that international travel could still be a while off, how do you see the Ellicos sector surviving in the short term? And what do you envisage the sector will look like a year from now?
That's a very, very good question. And it's a short term, that is, because it's such a short term market, it's going to be a problem. The Ellicos providers have no choice but to investigate ways of delivering more and more and more content in other ways and other vehicles. They've got no choice until the borders are open. It's not just the borders from Australia; it's the borders from their countries to Australia as well. And this is this is the issue that may have been overlooked in all this. And of course, there's always the risk that we don't know how different countries measure their numbers of impacts. And so, whilst we remain in a good position, other countries may not be as well. I think Ellicos can survive and will survive. I did have an idea recently about home to university, where you actually do your Ellicos and you do everything at home, or your pathway at home, and then you transition that into university, because that's one way, the kind of creative product we need to have out there. You also may have the ability, some countries may allow greater groupings of people together, so you can actually create what I call a network for some physical things which can be delivered by people who can be trained by Ellicos providers to act on their behalf.
Yeah, that's, with all these online testing, with IELTS and Pearson, there's a range of online testing options as well that are just getting more and more and more. It seems like every time we go to the AIEC every year, there's a whole new app and a whole new online platform for English language support, training, testing. So yeah, it's certainly heading in the right direction. I got another question here about the online stuff. Do you think the tuition fees for online teaching should be reduced in order to keep students interested and willing to enroll?
That's been around a long time, that discussion. It's that question about, they're not getting the same experience. They're getting the study experience, but they're not necessarily getting the access experience. I think that there has to be some recognition, maybe once they can return to other forms of study if they don't finish, that maybe the slight change in their fee structures or some kind of financial incentive to partly offset it. I think it's dangerous at the moment. I want to say yes, but I also know the dangers and risks when institutions are already hemorrhaging. I think the way to address that is to not only just deliver online, but deliver exemplary online and really make it a really fabulous experience, and leverage it. Some of the virtual intensive internships could be a way around that, to give people that mentoring, providing mentor for existing graduates from Australia who become a community buddy for students. We've got to be really creative, and the more we can deliver opportunities and options online, the less the differential has to be. But if we're just dumping content, which is already there, then we have to ask, are we delivering value? I don't think international students, some of them are hurting, but we've got to be very careful, because it's the same issue with the scholarships. If you peg it back, then it's hard to make up. But if you can exceed expectations, then the differential is not so severe. That's the second tough question.
Yeah, no, there's some really interesting questions here, and we have another winner on our poll. Which key message do you feel will have the greatest impact on recovery? It looks like support is the one that will is going to be the one. 37%, followed closely behind is employment. Really interesting data we'll get here. You can just take that and put it in your next report, Rob. Send it out. We'll finish with this question from Michael Fay. Are those Australian universities with campuses or delivery partnerships in the ASEAN region, Southeast Asian locations, better placed for the future than universities dependent on travel to Australia?
That's a great question. I think they are better placed at the moment because you can reduce the restrictions. The ones who are probably the harder placed will be the ones who rely on, let's say they've got a campus in location X and they actually rely on them from 20 other countries to come in. That's a toughie. But where you've got a local market and might not be so severe, I'm thinking, just let's put it out there, the RMIT Vietnam campuses, they may be better placed in the short term until the restrictions come. It really depends on the pool of the students and where they come from, how many barriers they have to go to get there, and what the restrictions are within the country upon arrival.
Yeah,
it's a good place to be at the moment if you've got a successful offshore campus, because that could be a point of recovery which could be quicker.
Yeah, I can imagine so. I mean, it's just like a business mitigation strategy, really, to lower the risk, if anything. Yeah.
Well, you asked earlier, do you think there'll be more offshore campuses? I think there will, but I think they'll be in a different type of partnership model.
Right.
And I think that, and as I say, I think people are going to become a good outcome from all this in terms of strategy. The best outcome from strategy, in one sense, is forcing people to think creatively and not follow what we've done in the past. I think we're going to. I've said it about 4 times. I'm boring, but we can skip a generation now. And it's not just the education industry and the international sector, it's also other industries which we can train people and equip people for.
I love the idea that we're finishing webinar with the remark to skip a generation. It's a lofty statement, but I think it carries a lot of weight. Do you have any concluding remarks? We've got a lot of people here from a very diverse background around Australia and around the world. Would you like to say anything to everyone?
I just think that everyone has acted superlatively, and I've had the levels of engagement and the communication and the questioning and advices and people doing so much pro bono and people giving feedback, and it's I think we have conferences and we all meet up and we all chat and we have coffees and go to events, but this has really shown a sense of community like I've never seen in the 29 years I've been actively engaged in the field. Yeah, well, that's right. And some of the conferences are cancelled, so this is it. But this is credit to you as well. Creating these webinars, creating the links, creating the forums, creating the dialogue, making people not feel lonely. I mean, it's great. It's just great, and what you're doing, and I think it's reminded us of who our clients are and who our customers are. We can no longer take them for granted.
Oh, well, Rob Lawrence, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Appreciate
No worries. Just letting you all know, you will receive the Asian Student 2020 report that Rob put together. We'll send that out after this webinar. I want to thank you all. You'll also receive a little survey to do. Please do stay in touch. We will send out invitations to new webinars. Tomorrow, we're doing an industry chat with Craig Foster, the ex-Socceroo, and he has been absolutely instrumental in getting aid to international students, as well as refugees, migrant workers, things like that. That's not a webinar, that's an industry chat, which we'll send out later on. But we'll just be sure we'll keep you up to date when the next webinar will come out. We're going to keep aiming higher for guests. Rob has set the bar so high that we're going for prime ministers now. That's it. Again, thank you so much for all your questions and your engagement. This has been unbelievable, and have a nice time and see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks. Bye.